Hold on a minute. What the ever living fuck?
You scared me there for a second.
Yeah. Okay. I rebooted the phone, and that seems to have at least done something. Okay, there we go.
Oh, fine. There
Jesus
we go. It's
Christ.
showing my computer. My computer is showing us as live.
All I had to do is completely restart my phone. That's it.
There
That's it.
we are
Just
live.
that. For frack's
There,
sake. I don't know. It was like there was a ghost in the machine. Literally, it kept saying that YouTube was offline and just offline. I don't even know what that means. So, welcome back, everyone. I have no idea if we've picked up. We probably haven't picked up from that stream. Maybe we have. Ayla, have we just picked up from the same stream, or is this a new stream?
this
Let
is
us
the new
know.
started less than a minute ago,
God
according to.
damn it. Damn it. We'd
It
gotten
was
such good viewership. Well, hopefully we'll get it back.
it was like 10
Shoot.
minutes. It's been like 10 minutes since the stream ended.
Oh no,
So
well maybe, but YouTube actually tends to hold streams open for a long time if they get cut off, and then they'll just reconnect. But whatever. Ayla, lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Well, everyone, welcome to part 2 of our Frock Flicks Bitch and Stitch,
and hopefully
in
the last.
which we complain. Hopefully, the last part in tonight's adventure, yeah,
Yeah.
in which we will be whinging educatedly and eruditely and with great information about the costumes and clothing in a variety of series. We started by talking about King and Conqueror. So if you have any specific questions about clothing from the Norman late Anglo-Saxon era from the late 11th century, then let us know and we will answer them. But also, we're here to answer your questions about clothing and costuming in any particular given production, and we will give you our honest opinion and tell you what they got right and what they absolutely got wrong. Mostly getting what they got right is going to be a short list, and what they got wrong will generally be a long list. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Well, I've been getting some good repairs done on clothing that has needed repairs now for several years, so I guess that's good anyway. Um, yeah, I don't think I saw a single still from King and Conqueror that made me think they got that right. Except as Emma said, at least they got the horses right. Like the horses, they accidentally got the horses right because the only kind of horses they could use were Icelandic ponies. So that's great. Oh my god. Yeah. People often ask me. Then they ask me for recommendations for good productions that they can look for visual, easily comprehensible, easily parsable references for historical clothing. Yeah, there. Ayla says, "What's your favorite film in terms of accurate costuming?" Right, and now, granted, I haven't watched like every production out there that is set in the Middle Ages, and I haven't gotten to see many of the really accurate productions, which, as far as I understand it, actually come from Eastern Europe. So Eastern European productions that generally aren't shown to non-Eastern European language speaking audiences generally have really accurate clothing. So if it's a Polish production or a Czech production or a Slovakian production, they actually tend to depict people in very accurate clothing. Because people keep coming at me with questions, well, what about this film? And I'm like, I have not seen that film. But then I look at the stills and I agree with them. Yeah, that actually looks really accurate. Um, uh, Flesh and Blood. Flesh and Blood, a B movie from the early 80s with Rutger Hauer in it, is actually surprisingly and shockingly good, both in terms of clothing, but in terms of material depiction of material culture from the first quarter-ish of the 16th century. It depicts both the nobility, the sort of nobility from the German-speaking land there, but also the Landsknecht, and it is surprisingly well done. I mean, people have underlayers, they've got overlayers. The servants are dressed nicely and in colorful clothing with appropriate headgear. The furniture is right. It's a very good production. So yeah, I can highly recommend. Surprisingly, Flesh and Blood. I will tell you though, it is a disturbing movie. It is. It's got definitely It's got there's essay in it depicted very graphically, and there's a lot of there's plague going around at the time of this movie, and so there's some pretty horrific things in that regard, and it's about Landsknecht who basically don't get paid by their contractor, the lord who has hired them. They fulfilled their contract, but they don't get paid, and so they end up basically stealing an entire train of his goods, and his daughter happens to be, or his daughter-in-law happens to be in the train as she's on her way to go and marry this man's son. And you can imagine that doesn't end well for anyone, actually, but least of all for her. So the movie is hard to watch, but in terms of accurate clothing, it's one of the most accurate ones out there. And isn't that just sad? Yeah. Vikas, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Oh, sorry. I'm going to block someone. There we go. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Mason, are you there? I can't hear you.
Um,
There you are.
I think I just have to be like close to the camera. That's like too.
Yeah, you need to get a microphone.
I need to find a good one because I don't want to waste money on something that might not be good. So I need to find what it's actually. I
Yeti makes a really good. If you don't want something in headset, then Yeti makes a good thing. But a headset, I really recommend a headset for this kind of streaming, because then you don't get interference from the speakers. So I'd recommend a headset. A medium grade one would be fine. Sony makes pretty decent ones. I've had my Sony. This is not my Sony. My Sony is charging, but I've had a Sony sound canceling headset with microphone for 5 years now, and it's still going. And that says something because I'm hard on my electronics, and that it still works is kind of amazing. So, yeah, Aaron, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Everyone's back. Yeah. So, Mason, what movies or shows do you recommend in terms of? Let's start with movies because shows is easier because it used to be that the BBC actually produced pretty decent shows. What about movies?
in terms of movies, I don't know. I mean, I consume much more like tutor media than anything, right? But there's at least my area of study, at least, there's not really many good movies.
You
I
need to sit much. You need to sit much closer to your phone. You are cutting in and out really badly.
I was leaning back. I was leaning right
Yeah.
back. Um, have any recommendations for a film? I mean, I watch a lot of tutor media, right? And there's no really good movies I've seen that portray that. When it comes to show, the only one that I think did it okay, the one show that I thought did a pretty good job was Wolf Hall. They weren't too bad. I mean, again, they still don't know what they're putting on Anne Boleyn's head, but it was significantly better than it should. Um, I don't have many real recommendations for movies at the moment.
Yeah.
Accuracy, at least.
Outlaw Emma's funny. She says Outlaw King has its faults, but at least there's no kilts. Yeah, we have a real low bar for what counts as accurate for Scottish films, don't we? Isn't that tragic? that's that's really sad. Yeah, I saw the stills from Outlaw Kings. It doesn't look like 12th late 13th century, early 14th century clothing at all. But yeah, at least there's no kilts. I mean, again, that's better than Braveheart, right? That's way better than Braveheart. No blue face paint. Um, not so. I don't remember about the armor, so I can't comment on that from Outlaw King. And at least a lot of the clothing had color, right? I can say that about Outlaw King. But all of the patterns, those any brocades or damask, they all were either modern or they were like 15th or 16th century patterns. It wasn't anything. The silhouettes weren't right. The jewelry was real weird, and the women, what Isabel or what the ladies are wearing is, yeah, bizarre as hell, real weird. Let me see. I'm so sick of the half up, half down hair they do in every period film now. Oh my God, yes. Oh my God. Every woman has half up, half down, like they're going to prom, right? Or to the spring or to the fall semi formal. Yeah, women historically in Europe have not generally left their hair down, whether they're married or not, because if you don't cut your hair, which they didn't, if you just let your hair grow and it gets really long, leaving it down is real inconvenient because it will get knotty, it will get dirty, it will get in the way of doing anything productive with your day. It will get tangled around your clothes, it will get tangled around things around you, and it will catch on fire when it happens to flit by a torch or a candle or an oil lamp or a rushlight. So it just doesn't make sense for women to have half up, half down hairstyles historically in Europe. It's just it doesn't track. It doesn't make sense. And all the visual evidence points to women in the 11th and 12th century as generally having their hair in long braids, but in casings, so it's contained. And then, of course, they have something on their heads over top of that. They're not just walking around in bare braids for the most part. Yeah, that half up, half down look and bangs. Bangs make me so angry. Anytime I see a woman before the before the 19th century with bangs, I get really irritated. Yeah. What about you, Mason? Do you what do you think about the half up, half down hair that you definitely see in a lot of the Tudor productions, don't we?
I don't think there's described how adorable it is. I don't know how to express. No,
Are you telling me you don't love it? You don't think it's the perfect look for a lady in the Tudor court to have her hair charmingly, front of it up in a cute little bun with little curls and her hair with like perfect curling iron curls in the back, clearly hairsprayed into place. You don't love that look? Is that what you're trying to say? T with Tosh says, I have a theory. The pre Raphaelites created a lot of this vision of medieval fashion. Yes, they did. The pre Raphaelites have a lot to answer for. But I'll be honest, at least the pre-Raphaelite women, when their hair is down, they don't have bangs. They've just got really long hair, right? And they just wear their hair down. And at least the silhouettes in the pre-Raphaelites are correct for like the 12th century, right? So the pre-Raphaelites have some things to answer for, but at least their clothing is clean, it's colorful, it's in a good state of repair, and it really does look like a 12th century silhouette. So, some of the details might not be quite accurate, but I would take people modeling their clothing off of pre Raphaelites over 99% of the garbage I've seen in the entertainment industry in the last 100 years, honestly. Yeah. No, pre-Raphaelites are I love the pre-Raphaelites. I love the emotion that is captured by them. I love the choice of colors. I love the way they actually depict some of these very intimate moments in these Arthurian romances. So no, I have no criticism. The pre-Raphaelites weren't pretending to be historical paintings. They are fantasy paintings. They are paintings depicting medieval fantasy. So I love pre-Raphaelites. I grew up in Delaware, where the Duponts are the robber barons of choice, and they were major supporters of the pre-Raphaelites. So in the Delaware Art Museum, because those were our robber barons, there are lots of pre-Raphaelite paintings. So on my school field trips, I used to go and frequently admire pre-Raphaelite paintings. That may have even informed my interest in medieval material culture. But I would absolutely take faithful reproductions of pre-Raphaelite clothing and armor over 99% of the garbage I've seen coming out of the entertainment industry in the last 100 years. Yeah. Let's see. The Victorian and Edwardian area have a lot to answer for the damage they did to society. Oh, yeah. they also have a lot of to answer for what they did to our understanding of history. Um, in fact, Mason, did you get a chance to read that essay I sent you? I probably not. You might not have even gotten to see it yet. The essay that was written by someone 100 years ago, explaining why we have these horrible misconceptions about the Middle Ages and providing hard evidence to counter that unfortunate narrative. And he actually accuses all of his fellow historians of being part of the problem, of spreading a false and unfounded narrative about a dirty, smelly, filthy, unhygienic, unsanitary medieval world. Did you get a chance to read it at all?
You sent me, I think, two things. It was at the universe. Was the one from the university?
It was, yes.
I
Yeah.
didn't get it tonight.
It, Mason, you need to be closer to your phone.
Right. I have a thing. Normally, I can see normally I can see my volume thing, but I have my thing set to see the chat instead on this. Which kind of
All
still makes
right.
sense. But I nighttime when you sent me that, so I didn't have a chance to
That's fine.
actually. But
I, I didn't think you did have a chance to read it yet. Everyone, I'm going to be posting a link on the community chat and on Facebook in the post with an academic essay written by a historian 100 years ago that debunks. Already back then, they were trying to fight the Victorian and Edwardian slander of medieval culture. And this historian says all the things I've been saying and all the things that are triggering so many people, right? So many people are being triggered by me suggesting that maybe medieval people weren't actually in the benighted era that they think they were, and that maybe actually people in the 18th and the 19th century were dirtier, less sanitary, and had less happy lives than they had in the Middle Ages. This is just triggering all kinds of people. Mason, I know you've been really bothered by the comment that people are ignorantly leaving, and demanding to know my sources. Well, this essay actually cites a lot of my sources as well, because this historian is using a lot of the same reference material that I use to come at my conclusions. And one of the very interesting things that we see in these Hollywood movies, right? Invariably, it's a town that's muddy. The sun doesn't shine somehow ever in these productions. Everyone has dirty clothing and dirty skin, and their clothes are in a poor state of repair, and it just looks like this absolutely downtrodden and depressed place. And this essay talks about looking at the same town in the Victorian era in the 19th century versus that same town and its conditions in the Middle Ages. And Paris is a prime example of how Paris has gone through phases of being more or less clean. And apparently, one of the big reasons that actually cities got filthy in the Industrial Revolution is because they installed sewer systems that drained into the rivers. So rivers were a big source of clean water for most people in these cities. And when these sewers got installed in the 18th and 19th centuries, well, 17th, kind of like 16th through 19th centuries, and they started emptying all of that filth into the rivers became unpotable. They became polluted and, filthy. And that's just one of the many modernizations that actually led to a worsening of certain aspects of life in these cities, and how it led to the cities actually being less clean in many cases. Whereas before, apparently in the Middle Ages, many medieval cities actually paid people to clean the streets. They actually they actually paid people with carts and pitchforks and shovels to go through the street and clean them every day. And there was also, in many medieval towns, there were regulations that required building owners to clean the street that was right in front of their property. And in Germany, to this day, well, at least till 2014, which is when I left Germany, people were still sweeping the street and the sidewalk in front of their homes every single day. They would go out and they would sweep it and clean it up. But but that's something that's stopped in many places once they installed the sewers because they decided the sewers would take care of that, except that where the sewers led to was public sources of water, and then that water ended up polluted, and in some cases the sewers fed into wells and led to the spread of really nasty diseases. So it's a prime example of how human progress is not linear, and what we consider to be an innovation or an improvement might actually lead to a serious worsening of conditions for people. Yeah, so comments or questions? You remember the Great Cleveland River fire? The river caught on fire in Cleveland in like the 20s. It was so toxic. Yeah, Atomicore, that wasn't the last time the river caught on fire. The rivers catching on fire in America is what eventually one of the main things that led to the EPA being founded by Nixon, by the way, interestingly. Did they crop dust their populations back then? Christopher, what do you mean by crop dusting? I don't think you actually mean flying planes to lay down fertilizer and pesticides. Let me see. My late brother was a hydro engineer who studied at Penn State, and he was the head of the Tribal Waters Drinking Program in the Pacific Northwest. Oh, that's pretty cool. Hello, Chaucer girl. Well, not quite Chaucer, more like Boccaccio. more like Boccaccio. Let me see. Patchwork says, there was a time in 1600 when the sun didn't shine for years, though. I don't know why. Well, there's been a couple of times in recorded history when we had like a summer, we had a summer with no summer or a year with no summer. And generally, when that happens, it can be tied to a major, massive volcanic eruption somewhere in the globe that basically leads to a kind of nuclear winter. And that's happened a couple of times. 1600, I don't think it was 16. I don't know about one in 1600, but I do know about one in the early 19th century, which is what actually led to Mary Shelley writing her masterpiece. Well, maybe she might not have considered it her opus, her grand opus, but that's what led her to write Frankenstein, right? Was this year without a summer, because she and Percy Shelley and Lord Byron were at this Swiss castle, and it was raining the whole time and dark and relatively cold. And so they started telling ghost stories. And she basically, after having also visited Burg Frankenstein on their way to Switzerland, up in Darmstadt, she then was kind of inspired by all of this ghost storytelling to write Frankenstein. And no one has learned the right lesson from that at all. Yeah. Nice outfit. All ladies should dress like this. I mean, there's lots of nice outfits in which ladies should dress. I guess I just wish people just dress more interestingly in general. It would be nice. Mark O'Farrell says, "Are you a teacher?" Well, I have been, and I have been an English as a second language teacher. I enjoy teaching. People kind of, one of the things I do on this channel is teach. So if you mean am I a teacher in a public or a private school system? No. Do I have experience teaching? Lots of it, yes. And do I do it regularly? Yes. But yes, I'm absolutely a lifelong teacher and student. I am both of those things because I'm constantly trying to learn new things. It would be wonderful to spend one day in 1920. I don't know about that. They had a lot of lead paint in the 1920s. there's a lot of things that are not particularly great. Let me see. When I was in Afghanistan, the sewers were open trenches that ran through the center of the villages. Yeah, that is the old school style sewer. Yeah. What is on my eye? Nothing is on my eye? I'm not certain what you mean. My eye is on my eye, I guess. It's an interesting question. Let me see. British old history outfits or Germans? Sadat, I'm not certain what you're talking about. If you could specify that a little bit more. So Mason is wearing a Henry VIII style ensemble from the 1540s. I'm wearing a Florentine ensemble from the 1480s. So not British at all in my case. Yeah, not British at all. Yeah. So yeah, welcome to Frock Flicks, everyone. If you're enjoying this live stream, don't forget to double tap your screen and consider subscribing. We were just complaining about and or discussing a variety of entertainment productions that fail fall short. And of course, answering your questions about historical fashion and or hairstyles. Seeing you sew has made me feel guilty. Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm doing repairs because I'm at a spot. I should have brought it. I should have brought my new Burgundian gown to show you all the progress on it. Um, I'm at a spot where I'm kind of running into, have to make a hard decision about how I'm going to proceed, and I'm having issues with that. Unfortunately, this I was using a sewing machine to do the long seams, and that sewing machine keeps throwing an E6 error for some reason, and it doesn't seem to actually have anything wrong with it. So it's like I'm cursed at trying to get clothing done in time for this big event that I'm attending at the end of July. I just can't seem to win for losing on that regard. Henry VIII trumped all the ladies. Yeah, Henry VIII had a thing for the ladies, and he had a short attention span, relatively speaking. Pepe Le Pew says I'm in the wrong century. Yeah, so Mason, if you could travel back to the Tudor court, would you? I mean, just no guarantees. No guarantees for your safety. Would you travel back to the Tudor court?
That's that's a good question. Think about that because on one hand, that could be kind of cool, but on the other hand, it's like also not the greatest of ideas ever.
Well, the thing that always makes me nervous would make me nervous about traveling to any time before antibiotics and vaccinations is contagious disease. And just the pathogens that would exist in that era. I'm no. And honestly, even though the Middle Ages was not as dangerous as people like to think it was, it also wasn't as safe as, say, being in South Korea now. So I would only want to travel back to any period before antibiotics and vaccinations if there was some kind of technology that could guarantee me immunity and impunity and safety to be able to safely traverse that world and make it back alive and whole and hale. Then there's many different periods of history to which I would love to travel. But otherwise, I'd really just rather have a window that I could just look through the window and observe, and maybe also like the window would let me smell things and maybe feel the breeze or something. But yeah, the past is a very dangerous place, and more dangerous than it is now in many ways. So I wouldn't want to risk it.
Henry VIII, he was like Henry known germaphobe for very good reason too. I mean, lots of his family dies of some form of diseases. Like, you know, you
Yeah.
can't.
So let me see. Emma Ketteringham says, I feel you. I'm making an entire new outfit for an event at the beginning of May. My historical character has gone up in society. She's no longer a camp washerwoman. Oh, no, Emma. That means you definitely need better clothes. Oh, my goodness. The medieval times were deadly, disease, war, earning a living. I mean, not just the medieval times. Let me be very clear. Up until the end of the early 20th century, all times were dangerous, deadly times in most places. There are some exceptions there. Medieval society isn't the only place. In the 19th century, you've got cholera, you've got measles, you've got mumps, you've got, God, what's the other one? Smallpox. You've got smallpox. You've got all kinds of really nasty diseases. And as for safety, well, there is warfare happening the hell all over the place in Europe, for instance, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. I would say one of the nastiest times to be in Europe, honestly, is the 17th century, especially during the 30 Years' War. It's just absolutely horrific. There's famine, there's plague, there's witch hunts where women are slaughtered by the thousands for no good reason, and some men for no good reason. People are starving. I think I mentioned famine. Soldiers, mercenary soldiers are marauding and committing all kinds of acts of violence. The 17th century is way worse. It's possibly one of the nastiest times to be in Europe. And it makes the Middle Ages look like a paradise. Yeah, people have a lot of misconceptions about the medieval world. Um, I would rather I would rather be in 15th century Florence than in 17th century anywhere in Europe, basically. So yeah, it human progress is not linear. We have not been on a straight upward trajectory since the beginning of civilization. And I've said this already once, at least once today, but I'll say it again. Give you some examples of technologies we have forgotten. We have forgotten, we had forgotten how to build domes. Yes, you heard me right. The ancient Romans knew how to build domes. That technology, that the knowledge for that technology vanished sometime during the Justinian plague between the sixth and the seventh and the eighth centuries. And it wasn't until the early 15th century that a Florentine architect and engineer and artist, Brunelleschi, figures out how to build domes again. Mason, did you know that the ancient Romans had self-healing concrete?
No, I did not know that until you would mention it.
Yeah, so they actually had concrete where if it cracked, it would fill itself in. And we only now in this century, the 21st, have figured out at least a version of self-healing concrete that may be what the Romans were using. We forgot how to make Greek fire. We forgot how to make a pump to propel it. We forgot how to do Tyrian purple dye, and only now in this century have figured it out again. So human civilization is absolutely not a straight line. And that essay that I was talking about that, debunked the slander of the Middle Ages as being a benighted, filthy, unsanitary, unhygienic, and malodorous time, mentioned how 19th century physicians openly derided medieval surgical practices and medieval medical practices. For instance, they're the ones who were deriding washing hands, and they were deriding the quarantine because that was a medieval invention. That was an invention of the Venetians during the plague, actually, the Black Death. They came up with the idea that when there is a massive outbreak of contagion, you need to quarantine people. You need to put people in a completely enclosed separate space for 40 days because that's about how long it took. They observed that's about how long it took for the disease to incubate and come to full visibility, basically. They're the ones who implemented that. And there's these surgeons writing in the early 19th century, these doctors writing in the early 19th century about how benighted the quarantine is and how it's a violation of liberty to separate people. You need to let people be free. If they're sick, they're sick. So they stopped quarantining people. And so cholera starts spreading, which is also spread by water. And all these diseases start spreading again because they decided that this medieval innovation that actually saved lives didn't need to be followed anymore. So that's, people keep asking, well, how is it that in the Middle Ages surgeons knew, or physicians and surgeons knew to wash their hands, but then by the 19th century or the 18th century, they're not doing that anymore? Because at some point, someone decided they didn't need to. That's why. Because they decided that it was a medieval practice and it was benighted and old fashioned. And that's not what we need to do anymore. That's why. Because human progress is not a linear function, everyone. Sorry. Let me see. If I had a time machine back to medieval Europe, knowing the taste of Korean food, I would probably spend the rest of my life trying to get to Korea for some samgyeopsal. Oh, but Tamakor, all you have to do is get pork belly and grill it. They grilled meat in the medieval Europe. I mean, that's all samgyeopsal is. It's just grilled pork belly. You can get a pig in medieval Europe. Let me see. Khalili says, I agree, but I wonder what population sizes were like from then till the early 20th century of World War I and the Spanish flu. But I catch what you're saying. You're right. It isn't linear. 19th century. Yeah. So actually, medieval Europe, up until the Black Death, had a booming population. And with the re-arrival of the Black Death, because the bubonic plague actually came in the Justinian plague, but the population eventually rebounded, especially because of the European warming period, which led to a an increase in crop productivity starting in about the 12th century, the 11th century. And they started being able to actually get 2 harvests a year because the weather was getting warmer. There's a medieval warming phase. And so the population starts booming. There's a surfeit of food, population grows, it expands massively, and then the little ice age hits. And suddenly there's massive crop failures starting in the early 14th century. And then the Black Death hits. And then the Black Death keeps coming back every 10 to 20 years. That's what most people don't realize. It's not like there was the Great Plague from 1347 until 1353, and then it goes away. No, no, no. It recurs pretty much everywhere in Europe for the next several hundred years, on average about every 10 to 20 years. So the population in Europe keeps dropping and then dropping and then dropping. It drops, it grows back a little bit, it drops and grows back a little bit. But the cities after the Black Death are generally very depopulated. And you can find chronicles talking about how depopulated the cities are, how buildings have been abandoned, and how there's not enough people to actually farm the land. So the population actually in medieval Europe up until the 14th century was pretty massive. And it doesn't really recover again until like the 18th century, as far as I understand it, based on what I've read. Yeah. It bothers me, Sarah February says, it bothers me that people call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages. The 13th century was innovative and the incubator of a lot of beauty, art, architecture, and learning. Yeah, the Dark Ages is a such a judgmental term and doesn't apply at all. Mason, what do you think of the term the Dark Ages?
We need to stop kind of having this general assumption that we need to stop having this general assumption that it was that the Middle Ages were terrible, like disgusting, terrible, horrible, bad time. The Dark Ages is not at all something that it's another one of those exceptions that we kind of refuse to die for some reason.
Right. The thing about the term, everyone likes to think of history in terms of Dark Ages and Golden Ages. And while I will admit that during the Justinian plague, and probably specifically during the bubonic plague of the mid 14th century, I would call both of those periods dark periods. But it doesn't have anything to do with their technologies because there's a massive die-off, and there's a certain level of chaos that unleashes in certain places. But even the term Middle Ages is actually a little pejorative because it implies that this 1,000-year period of history is just kind of a placeholder between the glory of antiquity and ancient Rome and the Roman Empire and the glory of the modern era. And so between those two glorious and very technologically advanced eras, we have this middle period that's kind of just humans sitting around in the mud waiting for progress to happen. Like even the term Middle Ages kind of implies that it's not an era worthy of in its own right. It's just a placeholder to get humanity from antiquity to the modern day. Even that now that I've really started to think about the implication of that term, even the Middle Ages isn't really a great term for that time period. Comment. Ayla says, I read a great book once. She thinks it's called The Sign of the Sugared Plum. It was about a young girl navigating London during the plague. Ayla, was it the plague that happened in the 14th century? It's called the Sugared Plum. It wouldn't actually, I think that sounds more 17th century. So remember I said the Black Death comes back every 10 to 20 years. Well, it hits London really hard in 1665 and it kills thousands upon thousands of people. And it's only brought to an end by the Great Fire of 1666. So a lot of things that people associate with the plague are actually the 17th century London outbreak, not the medieval version. So the plague doctor's masks, not a medieval thing, didn't exist in the Middle Ages. 17th century invention. The whole plague doctor hazmat suit, not a medieval invention at all. didn't exist in the Middle Ages. Um, the song "Ring Around the Rosie," not a medieval song; it's a 17th century song. So people tend to conflate the first outbreak with the second outbreak of the bubonic plague in 1347 with the 1665 outbreak in London. But most of everything that people actually visually associate or viscerally associate with the Black Death is actually the outbreak in 1665, which is the modern era, contrary to popular belief. But that still sounds like a very interesting book. It would be terrifying to be a young girl navigating London in any period of plague at all. That would be terrifying. I think the second book was about the Great Fire. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Comment, our population is dwindling here in America, it seems. I have no idea why. They're building more houses, yet you can go through swaths of this country and whole neighborhoods of cities are abandoned. Yeah, the building boom in the United States is just a function of greed, of investors wanting to make money. The whole idea in the United States is that you don't build buildings to last. You build a home to last 10 to 20 years at most, and then you buy a new one. You discard the old house and you just buy a new one, and you just leave the old one to rot. Like that's why all these downtowns in the United States are rotting, and why neighborhoods that are old and in those downtown areas are generally abandoned to rot because builders are allowed to just keep building willy-nilly instead of forcing people to stay in the homes they have and maintain them. That's an American problem. One of the things I loved about living in Germany was the very strict zoning regulations, where a developer would have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was actually a housing shortage before land would be rezoned for development. So suburban sprawl, not so much a thing in many parts of Europe, whereas suburban sprawl is a blight on the countryside in America. People ask me why I don't want to live there anymore. Real easy. She has never bought a home. Persian version, baby cakes. I own two homes actually currently. I've bought three, and I have lots of ideas, and I'm pretty educated. So you have no idea, but whatever. Oh, you poor little baby living in your mama's basement. Goodbye. Yeah, goodbye. There we go.
Hear
Yeah,
you talk.
oh no, he's gone. He's gone. He's been shown the airlock. Yeah, I hate suburbs. I hate them so much. I grew up in a small town downtown, very walkable, very lovely, very charming, very quaint. Neighbors knew everyone else. You didn't have to own a car to get around because the roads weren't designed to require you to own a car. I hate living in suburbs. Suburban hell. Can't stand it. Yeah. Oh, poor little small penis baby. He's gone. Let me see. There is a Swedish author and researcher and historian, Michael Nordberg, whose book, The Dynamic Medieval. I don't know if it's translated in English. This book is wonderful. Jennifer, what is The Dynamic Medieval about? That sounds interesting. You scare me. I do scare people. That's okay. So what do you suggest as more respectful and worthy terminology for the Middle Ages? I mean, yeah, right. It's like it's a set term. I don't know, Mason. Maybe part of the problem is trying to basically assign one word for this 1,000-year period of history when there isn't much that really unifies that 1,000-year period of history. You could say that the church, capital C, is a prominent institution, but there are plenty of places in Europe, especially in the first millennium, where the church with a capital C is not a dominant institution or organization. So maybe the problem is we need to break that era down into finer distinctions than just the Middle Ages. Because even ancient Rome is broken down into early Republic, mid Republic, late Republic, early Empire, mid Empire, and late Empire. It's not just all viewed as one period because there's a lot of development in the 1,000 years of during which Rome was part of the Roman Empire, and then it continues on in the East. So That's a good question. What should we call the 1,000 year period that has been arbitrarily called the Middle Ages? Yeah, what's wrong? So what's wrong with the term the Middle Ages? So my problem with the term the Middle Ages is that it is applied to this nebulous 1,000 year period of history. It really only applies to Europe, and not all of Europe, actually. And it there's nothing that really unifies it short of the Western Roman Empire no longer controlling a large part of Europe, although the Western Roman Empire never controlled all of Europe anyway. And and then, the beginning of the modern era. It used to be until the Renaissance, but now it's sort of identified the modern era as what a lot of people are using, historians are using now. So calling it the Middle Ages makes it seem like it's a holding period. It's a waiting period. We're waiting for great things to happen. We're waiting for the Enlightenment. It's the middle period. Instead of being something a worthy historical era in its own right, with innovation, with progress, with development, with art, with culture, with beauty, with science, with philosophy. The term the Middle Ages, especially when it was applied, was really meant pejoratively because it was also viewed as the Dark Ages. The Middle Ages was the less pejorative name, but it still implies that it's not an era that in and of itself is worthy of being, viewed as its own period of growth and progress. Yeah. Yeah, we need to go back to dressing full. Oh, watch you. Goodbye. Oh, poor little baby. Oh, the Dread Pirate Rob? No, thank you for the compliment. The dress is pretty dope. I agree with that 100%. Also, really appreciate the Princess Bride reference. Let me see. The book covers everything from women's right and life, everyday people's habits like food habits, wages, religious thinking, science, and religion. Okay, so there was a question about what women, did they have it better in the Middle Ages or worse than now? This is the Middle Ages is 1,000 years. It covers an entire continent. And where and when you are in that 1,000 years will make a massive difference in how you were treated as a woman. You'd have to ask me about specific places because there are certain places in medieval Europe, depending on the period, where women had just as many rights as men did, where they were on equal footing with men. Where they were treated well, where they were treated with respect, where they held power, political power, where they had economic power, where they were allowed to own property and they were considered people in their own rights. And then there are places and times in medieval Europe where that isn't the case, where women are viewed basically as the property of their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, their husbands, their fathers-in-law, depending on where they are. But even in those places, women generally always found ways to assert themselves. They always found ways to assert power. They always found ways to find some modicum of independence, even if they had to work the system, right? Most medieval women, really, their goal in many periods was to become a wealthy widow. That was your goal. If you were lucky and you had a happy marriage, then maybe you didn't care so much about the widow part. But if you didn't have a happy marriage, then your goal was wealthy widow, because then you would have finally self-governance and independence of a financial nature. The Wife of Bath is a really great example of that, for instance. So, depending on where you were in the Middle Ages and when you were, yeah, women had it in some cases as good as they have it now, but at least as good as the men had it. And that's probably a more realistic way to look at it. Not did women have it better then than now? Did women have it? Were women treated the same as men were in that era of the same class? That's a more useful comparison, I feel like. But yeah, women knew how to work the system, and this is one of the things that frustrates me. Medieval people, modern people, when they hear about women entering a convent in the Middle Ages, they view it as that woman being forced into the convent life, like they're being forced to take the veil and renounce society, and they'll never have a husband and they'll never have children, and they're just being forced to become a bride of Christ. And what a terrible fate. Y'all, becoming a nun and with the chance to rise to abbess in a powerful, wealthy convent monastic community was the life. Because in those communities, women were independent. They had agency. They had self determination. They worked. They had a roof over their head. They had food. They had an occupation. They had respect within their community and outside of the community. Right, many women wanted to join convents, they wanted to join monasteries, and not just any woman could. You had to enter those communities generally with a dowry, with a full financial package so that you would bring something to the monastery and you would not become a financial burden on the monastery. That's what women wanted. They weren't fighting it. It was a line, a road for independence, actually. Yeah. Drink. Oh goodness. Let me see. I love your clothes, so classy and beautiful. To know how much work, flow, and swear words probably went into it, it only makes it better. Simply wow. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. And yeah, Mason. Mason, you said you didn't actually make this outfit, right? But you're working on making an outfit.
I've made a fair amount. I haven't made all of it. Take a step back. Like, I made a lot. I made this. I made my kirtle. I made copies. Made the sash. But I didn't make all of it, right? I've done a lot of the time. What I like to do is I'll get things that are okay, and I'll make them better. Like, for instance, my shirt. I'm still working on it, actually, adding a lot of black work to the cuffs and the collar.
Oh,
So
nice.
I do like to get stuff kind of already made and then make it better. But I did make a fair bit of this. And my friend, I'm sure you remember Azalea.
I
Uh,
do.
she's finally getting a costume, and we are going to just basically kind of do everything up on it and make it much better. So I didn't make all of this, but I've made some of it. It's
Well,
kind of
that's
a mix.
lovely. I totally respect that. I really do. Question: why does she dress like a pilgrim? Ah, yes, that's why everyone's drinking. I'm not dressing. I'm not dressing like a pilgrim. Oh my gosh, I don't know why people think I'm dressed like a pilgrim. I didn't put on any bling because I don't know where that pendant went. Well, I'll put on this pendant. I'm not dressed like a pilgrim. You can tell I'm not dressed like a pilgrim because one, there is all this color. The pilgrims were known for their somber colors. Two, there's all this skin and neckline. And just, I don't know why, but people think this is a modern traditional Dutch or 17th century, but this is a 15th century kerchief. So not a pilgrim. So for those of you just joining, welcome to my medieval living history channel. Um, I do medieval living history, which means I research and recreate many aspects of, in this case, 15th century material culture, from the clothing to the hair to the jewelry, although I usually buy jewelry made by other people, food, dance, music, textile arts, fine arts in some cases. And so I am actually dressed like a 15th century Florentine patrician lady who is currently at home. I'm wearing a cotta from the 1480s and a simple piece of jewelry in the Flemish style from this era. And I'm just wearing a kerchief because I don't have a damsel here, a damosella, to actually do my hair in a very fashionable coiffure. So hence the lazy kerchief. But this is a 15th century kerchief. So yeah, 15th century, not pilgrims. Although I am a descent of the Mayflower Pilgrims, four of my ancestors came over on the Mayflower on that very first trip. So yeah, you can blame me for part of the mess that is the U.S., I guess. Have I read Song of the Siren by Bourgeon? I have not read Song of the Siren. Is that a medieval piece of literature or is that a more modern piece? Ah, Eric from Vermont, welcome. I'm originally from Delaware, so we're same quadrant of the US anyway. Jennifer says your hat really becomes you, young sir. I agree. Hats are the best, and God, goodness knows the 16th century has some magnificent hats, especially for men. Okay, yeah, love your background with the lady's own choice. Oh, yeah, so I don't know if you can you see the La Dame à la Licorne? This is the allegorical tapestry that depicts the sense of sound, of hearing. And there is the unicorn over here in this corner, which you can barely see. Yeah, there you can see the unicorn, hence La Dame à la Licorne. The originals are in the Musée de Cluny in Paris. Oh, Salisbury, like Salisbury, Maryland. That's Salisbury or Salisbury, England. Oh no, I haven't heard of Song of the Siren, Jennifer. Which doesn't surprise me. I'm kind of out of touch on modern literature or reading or entertainment. Oh, what's the scariest part of the 16th century? The Reformation. It's the scariest part of the 16th century. Calvinism is pretty scary. The plague keeps coming back every 10 or 20 years in the 16th century. Oh, what is the scariest? Mason, what's the scariest part of the 16th century for you?
I would say, besides the diseases that you get, I would say what comes along with Reformation, all of the stuff happens, specifically in England at least, but across Europe, I guess you could argue. Definitely what happens with Reformation, because so much becomes of that. That is honestly kind of just a bit, I don't want to say
You.
disturbing. Some
Yeah,
stuff is pretty.
it's you. It's you. It's disgusting. A lot of the, yeah. I think yeah. The diseases. So syphilis is on the rise in the 16th century. So that's fun. Smallpox is on the rise also in the 16th century. Cleanliness is on the hygiene is decreasing in the 16th century. One, because of the little ice age, and two, because people are worried about catching diseases by cleaning themselves, which is ironic. Um, yeah, scariest part of the 16th century. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably the diseases overall,
Yeah.
but yeah, the Reformation, especially those Calvinists, they are crazy, cray cray. They're and there's some splinter sects of Protestants in especially in the German speaking parts of Europe that come up that devise some insanely repressive regimes, especially when it comes to women. And those thankfully don't last very long until the population basically rebels against it. But we, yeah, maybe the Reformation might overall be the worst thing, the scariest thing
Yeah.
about the 16th century. But the diseases are pretty bad. I mean, Queen Elizabeth of England, I mean, the Queen gets smallpox, and she's so badly scarred um, that, that's when she really starts layering on the makeup, really have the foundation really heavily to cover up her smallpox scars. If you're the Queen of England and you can still get smallpox and be disfigured, that's scary. There was another good question here. What do I think of Philippa Gregory? I'll get to that in a moment. Let me see. What did women who had no dowry and could neither marry nor what did women do who had no dowry and could neither marry nor enter a convent? That's actually a really good question, and I've actually been reading into that lately. There's a couple of alternative communities options for women. One, many of them they can get a profession, right? Women worked in the Middle Ages. They were paid for their work, and there were professions that were especially dominated by women, silk women, for instance. So you could become a silk weaver, and by which I mean narrow wares, doing what I'm about to do, finger loop braiding. You could weave beautiful trims. You could become an embroideress. You could become, depending on when you are, you could brew ale and sell ale as an alewife, depending on which part of the Middle Ages you're talking about. There are lots of women who entered professions. They had apprenticeships. They would then, rise through the ranks and become a master, whatever. A Baxter. If your name is Baxter, then you have an ancestress who was a professional baker in her own right, because Baxter is the feminine version of baker in the English language. The same thing for Schuster. If you're a Schuster, then at some point in your ancestry, you have an ancestress who was a shoemaker. Right? So There's there's all kinds of professional options that are open to women. You could work as a field hand, right? You didn't have to get married because people. That's where you have the term. You could become a spinster, a spinner of silk or not silk of wool or linen, right? So there were many options for women who didn't marry. It's just that it may or may not lead to economic independence. But generally, people lived multi generationally in a home, and so it would just mean you lived your whole life basically in the home in which you were born with your family, and you would just become part of the economic household unit of your family. And there were many options in the professional level, but women could also enter something called a beguinage. Mason, have you ever heard of a beguinage?
I have not. No.
Right. So a beguine, is a woman who joined a beguinage, and a beguinage is like a secular version of a monastic community. So it was open to any women who wanted to join. They were often funded, they were often endowed by noble women who wanted to support women, or even sometimes noblemen who had a soft heart. And these were communities. They provided housing. They had their own economies. They had their own microeconomies. Women pursued actual trades in those communities. They were self-sufficient. They had their own did their own farming. They did their own weaving and their own spinning. And they were basically like micro communities especially in Flanders. They're mostly in the Low Countries, these beguinages, as far as I know. And women could go there and they would just live with fellow women, working and living communally together until they died. And those beguinages were in operation until the 20th century. And I think there might be one or two still operating. But happily, the need for them has kind of gone away. So that's a good thing that we no longer have that need. Oh, I see someone's home and was playing with the red pointer laser with the kitties. Yeah. So yeah, there were options for women who and the Middle Ages was a better time for women than the Reformation and the modern era in many ways. As shocking as that seems, it was a better time for women. They generally had more rights. They generally had more property rights than in the early modern era, and I mean by up until the 20th century. In many countries in Europe, your mileage will vary. Of course, Europe is not a monolith. But yeah, women had options. They didn't have to get married. Marriage was a way to hopefully become the head of your own household eventually. Um, and like I said, wealthy widowhood is maybe the number one, one of the best options. But it wasn't the only option. Oh, is this another man whose penis is small and who lives in his mommy's basement? Goodbye. I hope you enjoy the airlock. Oh, yeah. Goodbye. Let's see. The Cathars' religion was also very interesting. The Cathars were weird. The Cathars were real weird. Um, let's see. Other questions. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Not goodbye to you all. There was a particular piece of garbage spewing his malodorous ignorance all over the live stream. So I ejected him out the airlock. Those poor little babies that live in their mommy's basements and have no self-esteem and are intimidated by intelligent, charismatic women. Poor little baby. Yeah, bye, small man. Oh, sad.
Am
Yeah,
I?
so, yeah, go on, Mason. Wait, where are you? Where are you?
Yeah.
Where did you
Actually,
go?
you put the comment up, but I think you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, yeah, didn't mean to do that for certain. Ah, shit. Oh well. Sorry, everyone. I didn't mean to make that unpleasant. But then you got to see the comment the reason he got ejected. Yeah, I don't mind people disagreeing with me respectfully. I don't mind at all people coming with different evidence at all. It doesn't bother me. But I do mind disrespect, and I mind obviously outright slander and outright pejorative language. That's not acceptable in this community. Yep,
I have returned.
not acceptable at all. Okay, so Mason, yeah, I didn't. I'm like suddenly you're not there, but I could hear you. Okay, so um, yeah, let's see. Tell me about the locket. that locket. Are you wearing a locket or is it my locket they're talking about? Do you have a locket on?
I think they may be talking about you.
Ah, oh, this. This is not a locket. It is a cross, right? It's actually a cross. This is a replica of a style of pendant that is very common in 15th century Europe. Specifically, it's very popular. It's a very Flemish style. But we know that Florentines had jewelry that was made in Flanders and what is now Germany and France because those pieces show up in inventories and they're identified as being a Flemish pendant or a pendant made by a goldsmith in Nuremberg, right? So it's very authentic for a Florentine patrician lady to have a Flemish piece, especially because many Florentines ended up seconded to the Low Countries to serve at the various Florentine banks that had branches in the Duchy of Burgundy, for instance. So there was a lot of fashion sartorial cross cross pollination, shall we say, between Florence and the Low Countries. Yeah. Let's see. Last word about the series: you could have been noble characters in the fantastic plot. Oh gosh, I seem to have missed some comments, I think. Any thoughts on Tartaria? I don't know what Tartaria is, actually. So I don't. Have you ever heard of Tartaria, Mason?
I have not.
No, I don't know what that is, so I have no opinions on it or information about it. Can I explain serfdom? Oh my God. Okay. Um, Contrary to popular belief, serfdom is not slavery. Serfdom is a system in which people are tied to a specific property and they have to receive permission from the Lord if they want to travel off the property or if they want to move and become a serf on a different property. But for in exchange for this serfdom, hypothetically, the lord or lady of the manor is supposed to then offer protection and maintain housing and that sort of thing. And in exchange, the serfs work the land. They're basically the farmers. They work the land and they give a part of their harvest to the lord or lady of the manor. So it's supposed to be a mutual arrangement, a mutually beneficial arrangement. And very often it did work out as that. There are plenty of examples of lords or ladies who treated their serfs well. They hosted feasts for them on feast days, holy days. They made sure that in times of famine, they still had food to eat. They made sure that their homes were maintained in good repair, or provide them with materials to maintain their homes in good repair. But there were also plenty of aristocrats who abused that system. So, yeah, serfdom is not slavery technically because serfs still have rights. Like you can't just kill a serf. You'll face penalties for that, even as an aristocrat, as a nobleman or noblewoman. You can't just kill a serf. You cannot do that. You can't maim them. You can't just, do whatever you want to them physically. They still is now this also depends on where you are, right? Europe is not a monolith, different systems of governance. I'm thinking specifically England, for instance. And serfdom arguably doesn't last as long as people think it does. And it's basically gone by the end of the 15th century. The Black Death disrupts that system massively because there's such a massive die-off that a lot of serfs find themselves with no lords or ladies to govern them. And so they actually become free agents and enter the labor market. So yeah, that's serfdom in a nutshell. The very simplified version of it. Yeah, is he your serf? Mason is the man dressed as King Henry VIII my serf? No. Although Mason, I will admit, I wish I had the income that I could dress my serfs like you. That would be great. Oh, yes, thank you, Villa Vendetta. If you've been enjoying this Frock Flicks chat about history and historical material culture, please hit like and double tap the screen to like and subscribe. And I would just like to thank all of my channel members and my patrons and my Facebook subscribers for supporting me in researching material culture of the Middle Ages and sharing it in this format with everyone. Yeah, he's even got the rings on. Yeah, right? You're definitely not dressed to go and work the fields, Mason.
I am not.
Also, were there regulations for jewelry? Yes. Um, okay. So Emma, a serf. Well, no. Yes, a serf is not a peasant, but they were farmers. Um, so the word peasant is a word that does a lot of heavy lifting, and so historians are trying to move away from that a little bit because it's almost too generic a word. Because peasants could be poor or they could be rich. They could own land or not. It's a word we're trying to move away from in historical circles, which is why I use the word farmer instead. Serfs were generally farmers. It generally was part of their exchange, but that's also a very simplified explanation of serfdom. Were there regulations for jewelry? Mason, are you familiar with any sumptuary laws in the Tudor era regarding jewelry?
I have not looked over any, although I know that I know there were. However, I don't. I couldn't give you any exact like things from it. I have yet to go over those.
Yeah, that should be your next focus. So
Yeah.
before the Tudor era, there are absolutely regulations on jewelry. There are sumptuary laws starting they start almost everywhere in Europe at the same time. As far as I can tell, at the end of the 13th century is when the first French regulations come out for what is the Kingdom of France, which isn't that big at the end of the 13th century, regulating a variety of garments and luxury items, and one of them is jewelry, and that's actually a really funny one. I think it's 1289, and it's actually instituted to prevent one of the rules prevents um, commoners from wearing crowns and coronets. And it strikes me as hilarious that this was an issue, that there were commoners, i.e., not aristocrats, not royal peers, wandering around Paris wearing crowns and coronets, and that they had to pass a rule regulating this because apparently the merchant class was getting wealthy enough that they could start wearing that kind of bling. So that's just one example of the regulation of jewelry and ornamentation. In England, there are rules about instituted starting in the 14th century about the kind of metal that out of which jewelry can be made, how many rings people can wear, the kind of jewels that people at various levels on the social hierarchy and also economic hierarchy can wear. Yeah, they try to regulate it all, but these are called sumptuary laws, not fashion laws, because some sumptuary doesn't mean clothing. Do you know where the word sumptuary comes from, Mason? No, you don't? Okay. So sumptus is the origin of the word sumptuary. It's the root. Sumptus means luxury. That's all it means in Latin. So sumptuary laws are laws that regulate luxury purchases, luxury goods, luxury items. So sumptuary laws don't just regulate clothing and jewelry. They regulate food, they regulate furnishings. In some cases, they regulate house sizes. Um, because part of the issue is that as the banking system in Europe becomes much more sophisticated, people start borrowing money from lenders, money lenders, in order to spend more than they actually have to spend. Does that sound familiar, anyone? And so, and they're purchasing goods that are not made inside the respective polity, England as an example. Instead, they're purchasing goods that are made in some part of Italy, in some part of Spain, maybe further afield. And so they are literally sending gold outside the kingdom to purchase these goods. And so there is actually an anxiety about ruining the kingdom economically because there will be no more gold because everyone is spending their gold on goods that come from abroad. Does that sound familiar? Anyone? Anyone? Does that sound familiar at all? So the sumptuary laws are not just about keeping people in their social class. That's part of it, but that's not entirely it. There is just as much an anxiety about literally sending the country's wealth, the kingdom's wealth abroad. And in 1366, I think it's 1366, but it might be earlier, but it's Edward III in any case. The Commons, not the House of Lords, the Commons petition the king to regulate the purchase of luxury goods because the Commons is concerned about all of the wealth of the kingdom leaving the country. Now, that could just as likely be the Commons were a bunch of local merchants and local craftsmen who wanted the English to buy English made items. That could absolutely be part of it. But that's in part the anxiety surrounding many sumptuary laws. It's about people overspending and ending up in massive amounts of debt and debt to the wrong people. Let's see. Awakened just. Good morning if you've just awakened, and welcome to our Frock Flicks chat, where we're now just sort of talking about medieval fashion and medieval culture. But yeah, the sumptuary laws definitely reflected anxiety about trade wars, in essence, for certain, 100%. So yeah, these sumptuary laws regulate a huge variety of aspects of life, and they do get enforced. We have records of enforcement. And in some places like Florence and Bologna, they actually institute a fashion police specifically to go and patrol the streets and spot people, mostly women, who are violating these sumptuary laws. And there are actually court cases where the fashion police try to enforce in Florence in the early 15th century, where the fashion police try to fine a woman and she literally just walks away. She says, "Good luck, try to find me where I live." And they just report that they tried to get her to pay the fine and she refused. Was the English mafia really the strongest mafia in the medieval times? English mafia. Well, there is no, depends on what you mean by mafia. No, the mafia in the Middle Ages is mostly Sicilian, and it's not quite as developed as it gets later on. So no, it depends on what you mean by mafia. You might have to define your terms a little more clearly, but there isn't really much of a mafia in medieval Europe. Some people might say that the Knights Templar were a kind of mafia, or the Knights Hospitaller, or any of those knightly monk knights orders. But was the English mafia really the strongest mafia? No. I don't. There wasn't really an English mafia, at least not by the classical understanding of the term mafia. Good question, Gigi. The Tartaria thing is the mud flood conspiracy theory that a big civilization was wiped out by a mudslide worldwide and is covered up. That happened within 100 years. No, I've never heard of that, but it sounds implausible, shall we say? Yep. Yeah. Okay. Found Takeda in the blocked users as well. Takeda was blocked? What in God's name? Why? Why was Takeda blocked? That is weird. I mean, are the condottieri mafia though? I don't think so. Being a condottiere, I don't think is the same as mafia. Being a sword for hire is definitely not mafia. I wouldn't say that's mafia. Mafia is an organization, right? That's a whole different thing. Now, if you're talking about who are the most powerful mercenaries, that's a different conversation. And I know a lot about the Italian condottieri. I know about John Hawkwood. I don't know enough about mercenaries in other parts of Europe to really compare them and say who is the most powerful. I know that the Italian condottieri were really clever, though, because they knew that it was bad business for your well-trained soldiers to die. And so they did everything in their power to actually prevent conflicts from happening. They always tried to negotiate out, right? So, yeah. Tell me about the weirdest object in history. In my opinion, the weirdest object in history. Oh, that's an interesting question. Mason, what's the weirdest object in history for you? Weird is an interesting term. I love the Antikythera machine. It's not necessarily weird, but it's fascinating, right? It's a computer basically from 2,000 years ago, and it was found in a shipwreck. And we're just now kind of figuring it out and figuring out how it worked. And that's, to me, that's really fascinating. I'm not certain I would call it weird, though. Weirdest object in history.
Huh. That is a good question.
Yeah. I don't know. What's the weirdest object in history for all of you? There's, I always say this, that history is stranger than fiction. And it's true. But now that you
Yeah.
asked me to talk about the weirdest thing ever, um, I can't think of anything offhand. I can think of fascinating things, weird things.
Huh.
Yeah, I guess I might be jaded about what counts as weird at this point too. I've just seen too many interesting things to find things weird anymore. It's just all fascinating.
Another thing is, just so much goes on. It's you got to take a while to think about that, like to come up with a clear
Yeah, I
answer.
don't. That's not something
Like
I have on. I would need to give that a think for certain. I can maybe answer that question tomorrow. Emma says, I think by mafia they mean mafia. They mean town levies. Town levies. Oh, I definitely don't have enough. I don't focus on the martial side of things generally. I'm more focused on daily life and material culture. So I definitely don't have enough information to say that the English levies were more powerful than the English town levies were the best or most powerful. No, I can't answer that, and I don't think you can either, can you, Mason?
sorry, what was
You
that?
probably you
You cut
probably
out
don't
there.
have an opinion about town levies in the Middle Ages and which ones were the most powerful.
I do not.
Oh, Awaken just said, thank you for that lovely compliment. Your knowledge is top notch. I love history and have now found my new favorite channel, I think. Well, welcome to my community, Awakened, and thank you for joining. And I look forward to seeing you at future live streams. I do a lot of live streaming. I did a medieval cooking party earlier today. By the way, everyone, the food from that turned out chef's kiss. I haven't cut into the cherry blossom cheesecake yet, but it's waiting. I'm waiting for it to cool down entirely, and then I'm going to cut into it. It smells amazing and it looks amazing, so that will probably be really, really super yummy. Let me see. Not weird, but an amazing one is the mechanical swan. Villa Vendetta, which mechanical swan are you talking about? I've seen multiple really wondrous mechanical devices. Yeah, I'm very fascinated by mechanical devices. So Heron's inventions are really interesting. Um, Heron is an Athenian inventor, and he invents all of these machines that were automatons. And they were very clever. Some of them were coin operated. He actually designed a coin operated beverage dispenser in the 5th century BC, I think it was, 4th or 5th century BC, maybe third, fourth, maybe 4th century. I've actually been to the museum in um, Mytilene where the museum is. And he actually invents all these different he invented automatic doors so that at a temple, when you enter, the doors will just open before you mysteriously. But no one takes his invention seriously because medieval Athens, or medieval ancient Athens, was a slave society. They didn't need machines to do the work. They had people, right? And so that's one of the point I realized, that slavery actually it retards innovation. It hampers innovation because you have people to do it instead of coming up with clever ways to accomplish the same task. Was at this museum, which actually had reconstructions of many of his amazing inventions. So yeah, the Heron's inventions, they're not weird, but they're really interesting. And it's fascinating to think where we might be now, technologically speaking, if his inventions had been taken seriously and had propagated instead of just being treated as party favors and, basically being consigned to the shelves of history. Yeah, love his inventions. The church with interior decorated with human bones. Villa Vendetta. Are you talking about the ossuaries where they've basically taken all the bones out of the graves that need to be emptied every 25 years, and they use them to make furniture and decorative elements inside the ossuary? Yeah, that is really interesting. In the Czech Republic, especially, that's a big practice there. The monks get bored. Jennifer says there's a funny wooden doll, quote, with a movable mouth. with a string attached from 1600s Visby in Scotland. The string was pulled and the mouth moved as if talking. That is creepy as hell, but also fascinating. Let's see. Ayla says there's a weird underground palace covered in seashells in England, and no one knows who built it or why, but it is very old. That is very cool. Handsome, are you familiar with the seashell palace underground? That's pretty. I've never been there. Let's see. What's the best hair accessories that should make a comeback? This should make a comeback. Tell me this should not make a comeback, ladies. This kerchief. No more worrying about your hair. Toss it in braids or a messy bun on the back of your head. Toss on the kerchief. It keeps the sun off when it's hot. It insulates when it's cold. It helps keep your hair clean from all the pollution and detritus floating around in the air. And it is flattering as hell. And it takes no time at all to put it on. So this is the hair accessory that should absolutely make a comeback. 100%. Let me see. You should make videos of these dresses and objects. It's awesome. I do. I have, you guys, you need to check out my video catalog. I have tons of videos that I've made over the years. Horizontal, well-researched video essays on a variety of topics about medieval fashion, about making medieval clothing, project vlogs. I've got videos about medieval jewelry and medieval furnishings. I've got videos talking about how to cook things, how to make things step by step. I've got tons of very well edited videos in my catalog on my YouTube channel. So if you want to check out, I do recommend checking out my back catalog of videos. And I have lots of live streams depicting things like getting dressed and setting up a pavilion, how to build a rope bed. I do have lots of videos about that on this channel. Lots, hundreds of hours. I've got dance tutorials for medieval dance, full detailed from the basic footwork through to a finished choreography. I have embroidery tutorials, medieval embroidery. I've got, well, project vlog anyway. I've got tutorials on medieval finger loop braiding. Yeah, I've got a lot of things on my YouTube channel, so you might want to check out the back catalog. I cover a lot of different topics on my finished videos. I don't really make the finished videos anymore because, frankly, YouTube doesn't push them at all. They get very few views, but my live streams get pushed, so that's what we're doing these days. Oh, the spit dogs in their wheels. Oh, yeah, that's a really fascinating invention. Mason, have you ever seen the spit dogs, or maybe a reconstruction of a spit dog turning a wheel, a spit wheel? Yeah,
make sure I can be heard.
We can hear you now.
I have.
We can hear you now. Go on.
Okay, good. I have seen recreations.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So for those who don't know what a spit dog is, they're talking about a spit for spit roasting meat. And instead of having a human turn the spit, which sucks, they invented a hamster wheel, basically, but for a dog. And the dog would drive the wheel, and the wheel would drive the spit, through cogs. Unfortunately, it apparently didn't work so well. The dogs weren't necessarily eager to do the thing, and it was very hard. As far as I understand, it was actually hard to motivate them to do so. From what I understand, once it was invented, there's a reason it didn't last for very long, apparently. But that is a pretty fun one. Let me see. Why do I look like I'm in the past? Because this is a medieval living history channel, which means that we dress in medieval clothing. We do medieval things like cooking and dancing and fiber arts and sewing, and we talk about medieval material culture. So, yeah. Oh, goodness, we're way far behind in the live shot. Okay, here in Britain, women used to wear headscarves up until the 70s. It was normal. Now we all know the politics. Oh, yeah. Well, women in America used to wear headscarves too, especially to keep their hair in a nice coiffure until they reached their destination, so that, the wind wouldn't muss their hair. And then they would, of course, take it off when they got to where they were going. Let me see. Okay. Let me see. There's apparently a taxidermy spit dog, but now a genetic dead end. Once Clockwork Spit Turner in once the Clockwork Spit Turner was invented, dogs weren't needed. But they actually in the 15th century they invented a heat-driven, a turbine basically driven spit that would actually rely on the rising hot air from the hearth to actually drive a fan, which would drive the spit. And I don't know why that didn't catch on better. I don't actually know what happened to that. Okay, everyone. Well, it is late here. It is 10:30, and I've got another live stream tomorrow morning, my time. I'm in South Korea, during which I will be talking about 16th century Korean fashion, Korean clothing, and how it was made. I've recently been visiting museums here in South Korea and actually examining in person, firsthand, 16th century women's garments to see how they were made. And I'm going to be talking about my learnings tomorrow. So if you are interested in historical Korean fashion, tomorrow is your live stream. I will be talking about my learnings, my observations, and my plans for projects going forward. And I will be answering your questions about the history of Korean clothing because I have learned so much in this big research project that I'm doing. So that's going to be 10 a.m. Seoul Standard Time. That will be 9 p.m., 10 a.m. Seoul Standard Time on Monday, 9 p.m. New York City time on Sunday evening, and then whatever time that is in your respective time zone. I know for those of you in Europe, that will unfortunately be in the middle of the night, and I apologize for that. It's sometimes hard to find a time that works for everyone. This one seems to work. Unfortunately, I'm not at my best this late at night. I'm a solar powered baby. I work best in the sunlight hours, even though I'm pale as hell. Isn't that ironic? Okay. Yes, Mason has a channel. Mason, tell us about your channel, please. And let me make you a big boy. Okay. There you go. Tell us about your channel.
Make sure my audio is working first. Can you all
hear me? We can hear you.
So my channel, my YouTube channel is King Henry's Royal Court. Now it is a little bit different than Rachel's. All of our posts are in character. So I, of course, portray Henry VIII. If you couldn't tell by the whole Henry VIII outfit. But so there's been a lot of for most of my life I've done research on this specific period, and all of my videos are typically as Henry talking about some event, or something. So you'll see a lot of like on this day posts on my channel. Which I should really start filming soon, some more videos. But so it's all Tudor content, right? All like about everything anywhere between about 1520s, 1540s is the period that we post specifically on our channel. I have a friend who's on the channel too who plays Anne Boleyn. You'll be seeing more of her soon. I would very much appreciate it if some of you would be, check it out.
Let me see. It is. So his channel, the name is there under Mason Thomas. You can see it there, depending on the size of your screen, right? So absolutely check out Mason's channel. Subscribe. Click the notification bell. Everyone, I hate to have to give this lecture, but the notification bell, you have to click it and make sure that all is ticked. Otherwise, YouTube will only let you know when things are happening that it thinks you want to see, or rather that it thinks you want to see, not what you might want to see. So if you want to be notified, for instance, when we go live randomly or have to go live again because the last live stream failed miserably, then make sure your notification bell is actually clicked on. And YouTube resets that occasionally, so you may think that you have your notifications all set up, but you don't. Psych, as we used to say back in the 80s or the 90s or whenever that was. So please like and subscribe, everyone, to both channels. If you would like extra benefits or perks, and you'd like to support my work and get those perks, I have patronage on Patreon is an option that has probably the most perks for the various tiers. You could also become a channel member on YouTube or a subscriber on Facebook. And one of the perks for all of those is access to my private Creative Contessa Discord server, where I share a host of extra resources and we chat directly about a wide variety of very interesting topics. So lots of good information is shared there. Also a good place to ask questions about your own projects or get advice or support from fellow explorers of the material culture of the Middle Ages. So, for those of you who've just found us tonight, welcome to our communities. We appreciate you being here. Thank you for participating in the live chat, sharing your own experiences, and being part of this growing, beautiful world that we are trying to create. Otherwise, until next time, may your learning be creative. Good night, good morning, good afternoon, everyone.